Hello everybody, Dr. Sam here, and today we're going to be talking about teen hormones. If there are those of you who are watching this and have teenagers at home, you probably know what I'm talking about. Kind of can be an intense time for parent and for teen. But we're going to kind of dive into what's going on, what the body's going through, and just kind of, talk about it and how balancing them and sequencing them healthfully now will help them on later on down into the future as they become young adults in their 20s and 30s. So, touching base, teenage years, it is a very challenging and trying time. It's a huge time of transition as well, as we all know from all of us going through it ourselves. You have an increase of homework, you have an increase of like social life, you have the increase of maybe sports and activities and stuff like that. And so just all of that factoring in, and then also what's going on inside their bodies. We start the good old changing in how those hormones are starting to produce a little bit more and start to kick on a little bit more. And that's going to give us some other things that are going to present as symptoms or present as, maybe some mood swings. But and as we talk today, we're going to be talking a lot of like the female system. Sorry guys, we will touch base on yours, but the male system just isn't quite as in depth and more challenging. And so with the females, we're just going to be talking about them. So some of the first symptoms that females will start to notice whenever the hormones are starting to kick in, they'll obviously start to, do the cycle, have their menstrual cycle, and with that they might have a lot of uncomfortable symptoms with that. Everything from cramping to headaches to nausea, a lot of just kind of feeling, like I say, exhausted. And I remember even whenever I was a teen, I just felt icky, just like that overall feeling of just like ugh. And those aren't very, very pleasant symptoms to be having. So they're going to be going through that. Sometimes also things that we start to notice with teens, and like whenever their hormones aren't quite balancing or balanced as they should be, they're going to have those irregular periods. They're going to have, ones that are maybe a little bit less predictable. And there's nothing more traumatizing than being a teenage girl. And then whenever, and I call the period Aunt Flo. Aunt Flo shows up a little too soon or shows up a little too late. And the thing with kids is, like in teenagers, they want to plan. They kind of want to, be a little bit in control of whenever these things are starting to happen for them. And so whenever the cycle becomes a little bit irregular and shows up at different phases throughout the month, that can be really stressful for them. If they're out with friends and all of a sudden there it is, it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Or they're at a sleepover, oh my gosh, what do I do? Or at the pool, or at a camp, it can just be really traumatizing. The thing we're trying to do is like decrease stress within these kids' bodies, and that just kind of produces a little bit more. But what that's signaling to us is there's a hormonal imbalance that's happening within their little system, and we might need to kind of pay attention to that and get in tune with what's going on there. You also start to notice wavering cycle lengths. They might have some that it, lasts for 10 days and the next time around it only lasts for 3. That once again just shows an imbalance within those hormones and how those hormones are sequencing within their body. And then the last thing that we talk about, the symptoms, that this goes for both the boys and the girls, is mood swings. Woo! If you have been on the other side of one of these mood swings, it can take almost everything you have in your power to just kind of remain calm yourself. But just know, within these teenagers, their bodies are adapting the best that they can to the amount of stress that's happening within their body, and then also learning kind of what's going on physically within their body as well. Teenage boys, talking on this, like some of the things we'll start to notice with them, they don't necessarily get a bunch of the crummy symptoms that the females experience, but you will start to see a major increase like in maybe like aggression, or like the mood swings, like I say, or like the outburst, or like just like the major mood swings. Like they think they know everything and they're gonna let you know it. But within the teenage brain, we will get there too. There's a part of the brain, and we won't get on to like all the different parts and what the names are, but there's a part of the brain that develops way slower. And that part of the brain is actually the one that helps control impulse control, emotional control, and outburst. And so there's that part of the brain that just kind of lacks in like the forward thinking for them. It's like their just emotions are just going to fire off a little bit quicker, and they're going to have a little bit more mood swings because they can't quite control the way their brain is processing. Sorry about the dog bark right there. Girls, please. See, I have teenage dogs. No, just kidding. So to get into this, we're going to be talking about like the hormonal imbalances. And with hormonal imbalances, one word I want you to focus on and kind of take with you is sequencing. There's a sequence to how these hormones... Okay, so we're going to be talking about like the hormonal sequencing. And sequencing is the major word I want you to take home with you today. Is we have the hormones in there. But it's just a matter of keeping them balanced and how their sequence is happening and getting relayed from one to the next to the next. So that can just happen in an all very natural and like a fluid flow for them. To start with the females, like I said, we're going to be talking about the females primarily today. We have our good old ovaries, and within our ovaries we have the estrogen and progesterone that are kind of down there doing all the things that it needs to do for like this, you know, regulating the cycle and whatnot. We then have the HPA axis, and with the HPA axis we have the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis. So with that, we have the hypothalamic, which is part of the thalamus, and the pituitary, which is all up in our brain. The pituitary is just a very, very small structure in our brain that regulates a whole host of hormones that then like acts like as a cascading effect. Within that pituitary gland, we have the hormones of the luteinizing hormone and the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone. Does exactly what it says. It stimulates the follicles down within the ovaries to allow like the stimulation for like the production and like the, you know, releasing of the egg. That's pretty important whenever we think down the road. I know like as teenage girls, we're not thinking about kids or anything like that. But whenever we become a woman into our early 20s and 30s, this is pretty important that that is functioning as it should. So whenever it comes time to maybe start that family and they want to start that family, they don't have the issues with that. Within that hypothalamic pituitary area, we also have the thyroid stimulating hormone, and this is another one that then sends, once again, stimulates the thyroid, and it releases the T3, T4 hormones. And so with the thyroid, that's something that kind of gets a lot of attention these days. You might have heard of someone like even in their young teenage years who are hypothyroid or hyperthyroid. If they're hypo, that just means that like the thyroid hormones are not being produced or not stimulating as it should. And so with that, a lot of teenage girls and like young adult girls, they'll experience a lot of fatigue, overwhelm, exhaustion. Their sleep cycle even gets thrown off if those thyroid hormones aren't regulating as they should. So whenever the pituitary hormones are not releasing and talking down to those thyroid hormones, that's when you're going to see like that thyroid kind of become a little bit sluggish. So like I say, kind of be in tune with that. If you notice that your kiddo is tired a lot, I mean, they're teenagers, they're growing as well, so there's some growing things going on there. Their body's using a lot more energy to grow, and teenagers also don't like to go to bed whenever they should. So like the sleep cycle might be like, oh, well, they're up playing video games forever. But then again, maybe they should be able to regulate their sleep cycle a little bit more and go to bed at more at a decent time. So just kind of pay attention into like how their sleep is as well, because that could be a hormonal imbalance there. So we talked about the hypothalamic, pituitary, thyroid, and now we're going to be working down into the adrenals. Many people have heard of the adrenals and, you know, adrenal fatigue. We will get onto that subject here in a little bit. But the adrenals are little organs that sit on top of our kidneys, like down in that flank area. And we'll talk about that later too. But the adrenals are responsible for releasing cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, and those are our stress hormones. And if we're kind of like within a stressed state, it's going to kick out that cortisol, kick out that epinephrine, boost up, like ramp up the system, which is going to throw that access, that HPA access completely off. So if you think about like an axis, and I think about like, you know, things circulating around each other and circulating around an axis, whenever that cortisol comes in and just kind of knocks that off its axis, it's going to kind of be oblong, it's going to be shifted onto its side, not physically, but it's going to send all of these hormones that are supposed to be in a nice cascading formation, it's going to cause those just to go a little bit awry. And the second we start to mess with one hormone, the next hormone gets affected. So it's kind of one of those, we want this just to be a nice sequence, but as you can see, the stress that can maybe happen within a teenage body, the sequence might not respond properly, and it might, like I say, it's going to get thrown off and therefore cause that hormonal imbalance. And once again, talking about adrenal fatigue, we don't see like the adrenals getting too fatigued in the teenage years. It takes quite a while for a long repetitive stress to be within a teenager, but I mean, it can happen. But within adrenal fatigue, it's not, like I say, it's not present in the teens, but it's kind of like a precursor to whenever they get into that early adulthood, into their 20s and 30s, whenever they are wanting their body to, and their hormones to be firing as it should. So like the production of like, you know, being able to have kiddos whenever they want, at times that they want, is easier. But like adrenal fatigue will kind of kick in into that mid-20s, mid-30s range there, and there on after. But like I say, why can I bring this to light now? Excuse me. We aren't in any way thinking about, you know, teens and, you know, kids, you know, or anything like that, but we want their system sequencing, their hormones sequencing in a way that is fluid, that is natural, that the body recognizes whenever it does come time to start that family. It's just an easier process for them. So we talk about stress and how whenever the body is stressed and that cortisol is kicked on, you're probably thinking, kids stressed, teens stressed, like they're stressing me out, but how are they getting stressed? Kids have their own different kind of stresses. And within that, you know, it's going to affect three different parts, three different structures within our body: the brain, the thyroid, and the adrenals, like we've just talked about. But whenever we talk about stress and the release of cortisol, there has to be a chronic stress response for this to happen, because stress is good for us, but it's not in a chronic, intense, prolonged state. That's when like huge amounts of cortisol is getting dumped into the system and the adrenals are working overtime. That's going to start to shut down some of those other hormones as they should be functioning and as they should be sequencing. So that cortisol is just like one of those, just kind of comes in there. It's almost like a tornado and just wreaks havoc on that entire system. So if we aren't able to keep up with the stress, and like I say, you're thinking teens in stress, like they aren't paying the bills. They aren't, you know, having to come up with the payment for the mortgage. They aren't having to buy groceries, make dinner, get kids here, get kids there, have a work deadline and all that stuff. But kids do, and teens do, have their own levels of stress. Excuse me. And ways that happens is they're having to adapt to an ever-changing like societal norms. I mean, there's a lot of different things going on there nowadays. Another one is just going to be like tryouts, you know, sports practices, getting all of that going. Their, you know, school, academics, you know, keeping up with that. I feel like kids have way more homework than that. I mean, than whatever I used to when I was a kid. And it's like you have the academic, you have the sports side, you have the societal things like society and like keeping up with that, social media and how stressful that can be. And then like sometimes like the food choices and whatnot aren't the best as we put into their systems. That can also just put their body in just an overstressed, overtaxed, overwhelmed state. And so with kids, and you're thinking, okay, yeah, all the stresses, they might be able to handle it. But then on a side note, I don't think kids are, and like this kind of is a near and dear thing to me, and there's another webinar on this. Kids aren't able to handle their stresses as good anymore because we're seeing such a rise in anxiety and depression. There's another webinar, like I say, on anxiety and depression in teens. This just shows to me and like brings light to me that like we need to step in and help these kids, because the increase in that is just heartbreaking to me, for one. And they don't need to go through it, and like they need to have that better so they can be better whenever they are adults and like they're doing their things there, versus having like this teenage anxiety and depression. Like I say, just breaks my heart, but that's another story for another day, and another topic. But with that being said, kids have their stresses. That point's been made. As adults, we have our stress and we have thresholds, and those thresholds are definitely higher than what some teenage kids are able to do, because as adults we have experience, we have knowledge on maybe how to control or adapt to our stress. As kids, they don't. Their brain is still developing. They don't even have a fully developed brain yet. And so like their ever-changing brain, their ever-changing body, that is just something that then they don't have the ability to adapt to stress as they should. So like I say, as adults, we have a threshold way up here. Kids, teens might be right down here. So whenever they have a stress that comes along, here comes schoolwork, here comes friends, here comes getting bullied, here comes getting made fun of, here comes sports, here comes all this things. And then like all the physical changes that are going on within their body is another stress too. So we have stress upon stress upon stress, and we reach this point where it kind of tips over to the other side. Once it tips to this other side, that's when we're gonna get those major hormone imbalances. That's when we're gonna get the painful, periods, the mood swings, the, rage, the aggression, all of these things that are going on with these kids, anxiety and depression, because their stress response keeps building, 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 and it becomes chronic, it becomes prolonged. That's whenever their body eventually just goes, the heck with it, like I can't anymore, like I can't keep up with all of this. And so that's where we come in and like want to help like educate people on like dealing with the stress response, dealing with stress within the teenage body, and how, once again, we talked about how cortisol comes flaring in there and causes a whole breakage, uppage, everything like that within that normal sequencing of those hormones. So like I say, teens experience their stress. If we don't help them adapt to their stress a little bit better, their hormones are just going to constantly be a little bit out of whack, not be able to be in balance and help them regulate as they should, and they deserve that. And so as a chiropractor, there's like this whole neuroendocrine system that we're going to talk about. So like the nervous system controls the endocrine system, and the endocrine system is the system that involves the hormones. And so we'll kind of be getting into that here very, very shortly. So I just want to explain to you how all of the hormones work within the body. And like I said, we touched more on like females, and I apologize, males, but like we'll get to you guys. But then how that stress response just, once again, has a huge impact on that sequencing. With the teens, some of the things I do like to talk about, some of the things we can do on our day-to-day basis, or just kind of educating on you on this, is like the amount of toxins that we get into our body. Now, toxins, like what I want to talk about today, the first one is going to be birth control. Now let me start here and preface, I am not against it. Every person is different. Every female has their reasons, and every mother has their reasons, and they just find what's best for their child. My thing here is just to educate and empower you on this, and I think like an educated person is the best kind. So with taking birth control pills, what happens here is like the estrogen and the hormones that we're taking with this, it mimics our natural estrogen. And so it kind of throws our body for a loop, like, whoa, what was that? What just happened? And so with taking birth control, we see this a lot of times being prescribed to like in the mid-teens, and it's usually given for like some kind of treatment. They are having the painful, menstrual cycles, they're having the heavy flows, they're having the irregular periods, stuff like that. And I even think I've heard it, like people using it for like some hypothyroid stuff, which I'm not quite for sure how that works. But what happens with this is it actually then, once we take this foreign hormone, it suppresses the natural function of our hormones that are already within our body. And with that being said, maybe those natural hormones just haven't been given the encouragement or been given the, boost that they need from their nervous system and endocrine system talking to each other efficiently. That then we go in and we take this birth control pill. This starts to mimic the actual natural ones that we have, so it suppresses the ones that we have, and that just kind of throws the whole system for a little bit of a loop. And when that gets thrown for a loop, there needs to be that natural practice routine of the body. Like that's just kind of how we're designed, how we're made. And it's like whenever that gets just kind of thrown off, it can take some time for that to come back to where it needs to be. But whenever we do have that, and the natural flow and the natural sequencing of those hormones, it then can kind of lead on to later on into life and into their into their early 20s and 30s is PCOS, which we've heard of. And then also that lazy ovary syndrome, I think is what it's called, in which their ovaries aren't producing or aren't functioning as they should because maybe they've been taking a birth control pill for so long. So now whenever they're trying to have kiddos and start their family, they're kind of been, like the ovaries are lazy. They're not kicking in. They're not doing what they should. Well, they haven't had time to because their natural, hormones have been kind of shut down because these other ones that they've been taking with the birth control have kind of mimicked, and those receptors have kind of just been thrown off and off kilter. So like our bodies are, being a little bit disrupted with all of these birth control pills. And like I say, I'm not here to say do it, don't do it, but I just want you to know whenever you do start taking these, and like if you've taken, I have friends that have taken them for 15, 20 years, trust me, that is their thing. But whenever, and like every woman's so different, I just don't want anyone to be caught off guard. So whenever you're, in your young teen years, and then you go off of birth control, it's going to take time. There's a huge waiting period for some women not. They can get right off of birth control and start to conceive and have a baby and start the family that they want. But there's some women that it can take months to even years to wean off of, and have their body start to naturally regulate that hormone that the body needs in order to, conceive that child. And so I just once again not telling anybody what to do, but just want to educate you on how, maybe thinking, thinking things through a little bit. There's the things that are here and now, but how will that influence them later on? Other things I want to talk about, enough of that. Another things I want to talk about are other toxins are feminine products. There's a lot, and there's so many great ones now. Like when I was a kid, there was no organic tampons or pads or stuff like that. But why it's kind of important to think about those things is within these feminine products, there are so many dyes, bleaches, and chemicals that are within these products. And the thing is these products are right up against mucous membranes. So mucous membranes are able to absorb and take in things much easier versus just like being on our skin even. And so with those being in such close proximity, our body is soaking in and taking on those dyes and bleaches and chemicals. And those are actually going to start to disrupt disrupt the receptors within our system. And so, excuse me. And it's like with these chemicals being so close to like essential organs within our body, we just kind of need to know a little bit more about that. Some other things that are good for that we have like organic tampons now, yay! Diva cups, message me if you're interested about those. Just some other healthy alternatives to reduce the amount of toxins within our body. So then those chemicals aren't disrupting like the receptors that I'm going to be talking about here in just a short minute. Another thing too that I want to help bring to light is also makeup and like lotions, shampoos, hairsprays, all of that stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I am one of the biggest fans of makeup and hair products and all that stuff. But what I have done is I've just educated myself a little bit more. There's still products out there that are safe and healthy and natural and that don't then disrupt our hormonal system. So there's things within these products that are called endocrine disruptors, and what they do is they go in there and they act. So I'm checking out my notes here real quick. So this is just what needs to be brought to the surface is here. So like we have receptors within our system, like little chemical receptors. Our hormones are then able to come in and fit into these receptors. Whenever we have these chemicals that come in and disrupt those receptors, they might not be able to find that happy-go-lucky little connection that we need. And so that brain-body connection that needs to happen isn't quite happening as it should anymore, because the amount of chemicals, the amount of toxins that get within the body constantly kind of alter and make those disruptors a little bit more dysfunctional than what we want them to be. And so I just want to bring light to that. There's a bunch of different like phosphates and stuff like that within the makeups, and lotions and shampoos and all sorts of stuff. The neat thing about this though is that there's two apps out there that I want to share with you. There's the Think Dirty app and the EWG app. And what you do, you're able to scan a product and then you go in and it'll give you like a score or a rating, and it'll list all the chemicals that are listed within that product, what it does, how it affects your body, and how it affects all of the things that might, you're wanting to stay away from. So I find that super cool, super enlightening, super empowering once again. So just some of the things there the toxin we talked about, like the birth control, excuse me, I'm getting my notes here. Birth control, the feminine products, and the makeups and beauty products and stuff like that we all like to use. Once again, don't have to stop using them, maybe even just minimizing them or using some healthier, safer alternatives. We are going to be doing a cool little girls' night out, and it's where you bring like your makeup, little bag of makeup and all your products and stuff like that. And we're gonna go through it together. We're gonna find the things that are like good, maybe steer clear of this one, and just find some things that are just healthier and better for you and your teenage girl. The next thing then is, like I say, just bringing awareness to all this. And I know we're talking, you know, a lot about like things like down the road, but like helping these teens where they're at. Finding a good hormonal balance with them only helps them here in the now by helping their stress response within their body, but then also helping them later on in life being able to do the things that they want when they want to do them. And so just wanted to bring that kind of just to the surface here. And you're probably wondering now, like, how in the world does chiropractic help with this? With chiropractic, I had talked about that neuroendocrine connection. So our nervous system, we live our life through our nervous system. It does everything, it performs every function just by how it goes and innervates or wires every other system within our body. And the endocrine system being one of those in our hormones. And so what we find within chiropractic is we hold different amounts of stress within different parts of our body. And many times whenever I have a client come in, and whether they be like a teenage girl or a young woman that is ready to start her family and they're maybe having some fertility issues, that we're going to find a lot of tension and a lot of stress within certain parts of their body. And what's very interesting is many of that is going to be like up here in the neck and shoulder tension. How many of us women have neck and shoulder tension? But as you can see, how close is that to right here where our thyroid is? And so a lot of that tension, so like so many of this like regional parts of the spine also give indication of where maybe something else isn't functioning as it should on the internal side, or how an organ isn't functioning as it should. So neck tension, so it's right there by the thyroid. Many women, we have that kind of like that flank pain or that mid to lower back pain. Well, right there, that's where our adrenals are, right there by the kidneys. And so whenever we have that pain and like stress and tension within part of that part of the spine, that's going to maybe show, like, let us know that, like, hey, maybe check out, see how the adrenals are, how are they doing? How are they, functioning? How much stress is this person under? Get to the root of like what's going on and how much stress they're under. And maybe those adrenals are kicking out and on overload, and then that's going to come up and cause them to be tired and stressed and overwhelmed, causing tension, and that's going to cause that thyroid maybe not to function as it wants to either. And so we're able then to just kind of dive deep in, see how their body's functioning, not only like how their muscles and tension is doing, but then also we have scans within our office letting us know internally how the nervous system is functioning as well, and where the stress spots are for it as well. And so that's where we kind of are able to, help influence the sequencing of those hormones to help balance them out. So then like this teenager can go through their teenage years a little bit more swiftly, and that'll help both mom and dad and brother and sister and teachers and everybody else within their life, because their hormones are regulating a little bit better. They're able to handle their mood swings. They're not experiencing the fatigue, the overwhelm, the overstress, and are able to adapt to their stress. And that's as chiropractors, we find once again where that stress, the overload is within their body. Let's release it. Let's let that body then get back to its innate ability to heal itself, and let it regulate those hormones and get everything firing and sequencing as it should. If there's been anything tonight that sounds like, hey, like that sounds like my teen, like she's having issues with the menstrual and she's having issues with her period, and my teenage boy, like, holy cow, the mood swings and stuff like that. If there's anything that's kind of like struck a chord with you, please reach out. I am here to help you guys. Takes a village to raise these kiddos, and I'd be happy to be in that village with you. Like I say, Samantha Luther here with SJL Wellness. You can reach me at 402-432-7702, or my email's sjlwellness@gmail.com. Here to help you guys, here to serve you. If you have any questions, please reach out. I am very excited to help you all, and we'll be in touch on the next webinar. Have a good one.